Did you know that if you recorded a clip of complete silence, then put it into a sampler, slice a tiny piece of it, add a ton of gain and reverb, you literally made a synth out of nothing. I have 46 more music production tips in this video, and I'm positive there's gonna be at least a few that you've never heard of. Let's go. To make your MIDI piano sound more realistic, don't play all the notes exactly at the same time. Slightly offset the timing of each note, especially in chords, and also increase the velocity on the lower, the bass notes to emulate the natural dynamics of a real pianist. Incorporating Foley, like random voices, footsteps, or even the sound of clinking glasses in a bar, can instantly give your melodies and your beats a unique texture. Foley sounds and ambience can make your music sound a lot more natural, and can add an unexpected human element that just gives more character to the sounds. By the way, these tips are very useful, but if you want more in-depth music education in a collaborative environment and for really cheap, literally this week I launched my brand new music academy called Better Music. We started accepting students not even a week ago, and we already have a ton of people in there learning, collaborating, getting feedback directly from me, and building friendships connected by our shared love for music and music production. Here's what some of them have said so far. If you want to know more about it, scan the QR code right here or click the link at the top of the description. We're only accepting students for a few more days right now, so don't sit on it for too long. And if you're watching this in the future, you can click the same link and sign up for the waitlist so you can be the first one to be notified when we have more slots open up. What's the next tip? If your 808s aren't hitting as hard as you want, it could be because they're not in the right key. Every 808 sample resonates the best in a specific range of notes, so try shifting the key of your 808 up and down until you find that sweet spot where it's loud, present, and boomy. One of the best ways to learn how to arrange your tracks is around an a cappella of a song that kinda sounds similar to the one that you're making. Download the a cappella and shape your beat around the vocals, focusing on where the transitions, the drops, and the builds naturally fall. Once you're happy with the arrangement, just remove the a cappella and you have a pretty solid structure to get started. If your 808 or bass sounds are not cutting through on small speakers like phones, try adding a little bit of saturation. This introduces harmonic content in sort of the mid-high range, which is exactly where smaller speakers can play the best. So adding a little bit of saturation to your bass sounds can help the low end come through even on small phone speakers. If your mix is not sounding as loud as you would like it to, the answer is almost never to turn up the volume. Instead, try using EQ to remove frequencies that don't need to be there. By carving out unnecessary low end or muddy mid-range, you can actually free up space for the instruments to be perceived as louder. If your chord progressions are feeling a little bit stale, a quick way to spice them up is to invert the chords. Take one or two notes from the chords that you have and move them an octave up or an octave down. By the way, right now I'm working in Ableton, but all these tips are universal, doesn't matter if you're in FL, Logic, Pro Tools, or whatever else. If you're struggling to make impactful drum fills and transitions, try experimenting with slower triplets, like a quarter note or 8-note triplet. This creates sort of a slowdown effect that can help you build tension before a drop. If you're just starting out and you're not happy with how your tracks are sounding, the answer is not to buy new plugins. Wait. Focus on mastering the basics with the stock plugins that you already have built into your DAW, and once you've learned and kind of mastered the fundamentals, then you'll really know what's missing, and that's when you can actually upgrade and invest some money. If you're a beginner, I'm sorry to tell you this, but expensive plugins are not gonna make your music good. You just have to practice a little bit more. One of the quickest ways to design sounds that are more interesting is layering. Take two different sounds, whether it's two synths or two drum hits, stack them together, and process them with a few effects. Layering lets you combine the quality of each of the sounds, creating something that's fuller and a lot more unique sounding than just a single sample. Always save your presets. Every time you stumble on a cool sound, a chord progression, effect chain, immediately save it as a preset. This will save you from having to recreate it again later, and also, if you don't save it, chances are you're just gonna forget it. Over time, you'll build a library of go-to effect chains and sounds that can help you go a lot faster and just kind of get your ideas down in a much better way. When it comes to drops, you don't always have to add more sounds during the drop. If you want your drop to feel massive and epic, then yes, add more layers to create like a wall of sound. But if you're going for that like dirty, stank face type of drop, chances are you might want to actually remove elements instead of adding more. Removing sounds creates space and allows the drums and the bass to really hit you way harder. If you're struggling to come up with catchy lead melodies, try using your voice instead of your DAW. Sing or hum the melody that you have in mind and then reproduce it with an instrument. Using your voice ensures that the melody is singable, making it more likely to actually stick with the listener. To add variation to your bass lines without making them overly complex, try using octaves and fifths. The octave is 12 semitones up, and the fifth is 7 semitones up. And then a quick trick to make your bassline sound more fluid and connected is to use walk-ups or walk-downs. A fun way to spice up your tracks is to create an environment with reverb and then completely switch it up. This is going to give the listener like a wake-up call while they're listening because they got used to hearing the sound in a certain set, in a certain environment, and then you switch it on them and it feels completely different. So use a certain reverb on a certain section, but then switch it up completely for another section, or maybe just for one of the elements. This is something that I do every time I'm feeling uninspired. Just get your phone, record a random sound, like literally anything, then import it into your DAW and force yourself to use effects, stretch it, pitch it up and down as much as you can. Just really completely destroy the sound. To make your melodies sound fuller and more dynamic, a really quick trick is to add 1 or 2 instruments playing the root note a couple octaves above the rest of the melody. This instantly adds size and fills up your melody and just makes it pop out of the mix way better. This is a really important one. There are no rules in music production. Always remember, no matter what anyone tells you, that there are no rules to what you do. There's just common practice. People call rules things that we tend to do often, but they're not actually rules. It's just what we tend to do often. If something sounds good to you and it's breaking one of these rules, then it's completely right. For a quick and effective way to create contrast between the intro and the drop, adjust the panning and stereo width of the track. For example, you can make the intro feel wide and expansive to give sort of like a big ambience vibe, and then tighten the stereo field for your drop to make it feel punchy and really in your face. If you find yourself adding the same elements to every single one of your projects, maybe it's a specific effect or maybe it's like EQs on all your tracks, add them to your default DAW template. This saves you time and keeps your workflow consistent so you can stay focused on what you're actually trying to do instead of setting up the session every single time. And another really underrated workflow tip is to learn your shortcuts. It's not just about going faster, because who cares, you can go slow, it's not a problem. It's more about not interrupting your creative process. The last thing you want to do when you're focused on your track and it's kind of starting to come together is having to stop to go on Google to search how to split a track in 2 in Ableton because you don't remember the combination. That's the quickest way to completely lose inspiration. Don't sit on a project for too long. Try to get your track to a finished stage, even if it's not 100%, as quickly as you can, in like 1 or 2 sessions. This is because the more you sit on it, the further away you're going to get from the original spark of inspiration, from the original idea. When you work quickly, you can capture the idea that you had exactly the way you wanted it, with the right energy and the right feel, and then slowly over time, you can actually like perfect it. But at least get the idea and the structure down as fast as possible. Try blending field recordings of natural elements like water, wind, grass, scraping. Try layering those to synth electronic sounds. Combining natural like warm sounds to like these very digital sounding things can create this really unique texture that just sounds really grounded but also really futuristic. I don't know, it's really cool. Don't be afraid to steal chord progressions or drum patterns. It's perfectly okay to borrow a chord progression from one of your favorite songs and use it as a starting point for inspiration. By using elements from something that you love, you're going to end up creating something fresh and unique. In fact, many iconic, legendary tracks throughout history were built exactly this way, by building upon something that artist loved. When you're building a melody or a bass line, instead of letting each note fill up the entire gap up to the next note, be very specific and deliberate with how long these notes last. Changing note lengths can drastically change the vibe of your groove, making it feel tighter or looser, and instantly adding more rhythm and groove to your music. When you've got multiple layers or instruments that serve the same purpose, like all your drums or a stack of synths, group them together into a bus track and apply your effects to the entire group. The secret to a good mix doesn't start with EQ, compression, or anything like that. It's all about sound selection. If your samples and instruments already fit nicely with each other and are high quality sounds, the track is going to sound basically done even without doing anything. A vocoder is one of the fastest ways to turn a boring vocal sound into something really cool and unique.
Vocoder is one of the fastest ways to turn a boring vocal sound into something really cool.
There's a lot that you can do with this, but it's a really quick way to create some unique sounds. We all know that reversing a melody makes it sound cooler. But there's something I like to do even more. Take your melody sample and try slicing it up at key points. For example, when the chords are changing or in certain parts of the melody. Then take all those little chops, those smaller sections, and reverse them one by one, but keeping them in the same order. This way you're going to maintain the original flow and sort of structure of the original melody, but you're going to add the cool, unique sound of reversing it with a really different twist. If your chords are starting to feel flat or static, an LFO is the quickest way to get them to sound interesting again. A great tool for this is Shaperbox, where you can basically add LFO for a bunch of different parameters like volume, filter, panning. Just draw some random curves, run them through your sound, and try to find some unique, cool pattern. One of the simplest but most effective ways to sound design is microsampling. Take any piece of audio, it could literally be anything, even random noise, put it into a sampler and chop it down to like a really small little sliver of sound. Just a few milliseconds. Now you have this brand new sound that you can play as an instrument, build chords, melodies, wherever you want, and you can adjust the little brackets on the sampler to completely change your sound. It's a really fun way to experiment with sound design. If your melody is sounding a little bit disconnected or too basic, try bouncing it onto a new track. Then slice up each individual chord, reverse some of the chops, and place them in between your original MIDI chords to kind of fill the gaps. This creates an interesting texture that glues the melody together and fills the empty space in a creative way, adding a smoother, more connected feel to all your melodies. Instead of just playing chords on one instrument, let's say the piano, split them up into different instruments. This way the chords are going to sound a lot more interesting because they're divided with different timbres and they're not just one single sound. If you want to take this tip to the next level, you can also go in each of the instruments and turn those little single note lines into more complex melodies. If you're struggling to create the right swing for your drums, take a track from one of your favorite producers that really has that groove down and import it into your DAW. Then literally look at the audio wave and line up your kicks and snares and hi-hats with theirs. And this is going to help you really understand how they place their sounds off the grid. And then from there you can obviously tweak it and make it your own, but this gives you a really good starting point to get the swing right. If you want to create a wider, bigger sound when it comes to your synths and your leads, try detuning them a little bit up and down with each other, and then maybe even add a little stereo effect or a chorus. This is going to create a much richer, much bigger sound. Adding ghost notes to your drum grooves is one of the main things that you can do to give life to your drums. Ghost notes are just softer hits placed in between your main kick and snares. And they're going to create a more complex, more dynamic, and more human-sounding drum groove. It's a great way to take a very simple beat and make it swing. When applying reverb, especially to instruments like vocals or synths, add a high-pass filter to your reverb to remove the lower frequencies. This prevents the low end from getting too muddy with the reverb, ensuring that your kick and your bass still come through nice and clear. The most common use for sidechain compression is on the bass and the kick drum. But one of the most underrated uses of sidechaining is actually on melodies. Something that I really like to do when I want to create a really wavy, almost like old school beat, is to take all of my instruments, all of my percussions, basically the entire beat except for kick drum and bass, and sidechain the whole beat to the kick drum. If your mix is feeling a little bit empty or lacks energy, adding white noise at the bottom can fix that. Just add a low-level white noise layer, either constant or pulsing, to instantly give your track a better atmosphere and energy without having to clutter up the main elements by adding more sounds. You can also automate the white noise level to make it rise and fall during build-ups or breakdowns or drops, just to keep adding movement. I was surprised to learn how many producers don't actually already do this. Whenever you make a melody, any kind of loop, or even like a drum pattern, you should 100% resample it. Chop it up, reverse it, repitch it, stretch it out, add effects. Use your creativity to really push the boundaries of the original melody that you made. Tune your percussions. Just like with melodic instruments, percussive elements that are higher in pitch like toms or congas or things like that, they also have their own pitch and it needs to match the one of your beat. To make your bass lines sound more powerful, try duplicating the track an octave higher. So basically just have the two layers going at the same time, the regular one and an octave higher, and adjust the volume of each so that you're adding a nice cool texture without destroying your low end. So if you take any short sample like a vocal chop or a percussion hit, literally anything, stretch it out as much as you can, like too much, then wrench it in reverb and wrench it in delay, and you will have created a brand new pad sound with a completely unique approach and a unique texture and sound. If you're getting kind of bored of your usual drum sounds, try recording everyday items. Keys, tables, pens, a door closing, literally anything. Just record a bunch of everyday sounds and experiment with layering them. Especially if you take some of these sounds and layer them on normal drums like a regular snare drum, you're going to have this really cool, unique, textured sound that can't really be replicated by any other producer or any other stock sound that you find. Really underrated technique: once you've built a complex effects chain for one of your sounds, resample the output of just the effects, and then from there you can chop it up, reverse it, manipulate the sound even further, and you can get some of the most interesting sounds, most creative, textured sounds by doing this technique. If you want more in-depth music education in a collaborative environment and for very cheap, check out my new academy, Better Music, at the link at the top of the description. Thank you guys, and I'll see you soon.